There's a moment when silence grows louder than words, when distance feels like a punishment you never intended to give. In that moment, the avoidant mind whispers a dangerous thought. I ruined everything. But is that really the truth? Or is it just another trick of fear dressed as certainty? Fear has a way of magnifying everything. A single misstep that most people would shrug off becomes, in their eyes, a catastrophe. The avoidant mind doesn't process mistakes the way others do. Instead of viewing them as small, forgivable, or even human, they view them through the lens of intimacy's deepest threat, exposure. The moment they think they let their guard down or didn't handle a situation perfectly, panic sets in. Suddenly, what was just a pause in conversation or a misunderstood tone feels like an irreversible failure. They replay it over and over, convinced they've broken something beyond repair. This fear is rooted in the very foundation of how they handle closeness. To someone who is comfortable with intimacy, vulnerability is messy but natural. It's expected that words won't always land right, that silences will sometimes be awkward, that emotional missteps are just part of connection. But for the one who struggles with avoidance, every crack in the armor feels like a fatal flaw. They believe they are supposed to be guarded, controlled, self-sufficient. And when a moment slips through, when their voice trembles, when they share more than they intended, when they react with coldness instead of warmth, they believe they've betrayed themselves. And worse, they believe they've betrayed the connection. In reality, though, what they consider a disaster is often nothing more than a ripple. The other person might not even notice. They might see it as a normal human reaction. But the avoidant doesn't measure mistakes by reality. They measure them by the weight of their own fear. Their mind says, if I showed too much, I'll be rejected. If I showed too little, I'll be abandoned. Either way, the thought circles back to the same conclusion. I must have screwed it up. What they can't always see is that intimacy is not destroyed by small mistakes. It's built through them. It's built when someone stumbles and comes back, when someone admits they're afraid, when someone takes space but chooses to return. The avoidance fear tells them that being imperfect will cost them everything. But the truth is the opposite. Being imperfect is what makes the bond real. Perfection doesn't connect people, authenticity does. The tragedy is that their fear of screwing up often becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Believing they've already ruined it, they may retreat even further, withdrawing into silence, creating the very distance they're so afraid of. In trying to protect themselves from rejection, they sometimes create the appearance of it. And yet, beneath it all, the desire for connection is still alive. That's why the thought, I messed it up, hurts so deeply. Because if they truly didn't care, there would be no fear of losing it. The truth is far gentler than the story they tell themselves. A mistake doesn't mean failure. A hesitation doesn't mean abandonment. Fear only tricks them into believing that intimacy cannot survive imperfection. But love, real love, doesn't demand flawless performance. It asks only for presence, for the courage to return after the stumble, for the willingness to try again. There is a strange paradox in the way they move through connection. The moments that most people celebrate as closeness are the very moments that make them uneasy. Vulnerability, to them, doesn't feel like a bridge, it feels like a crack in the armor. When they open up, even in small ways, the echo of it lingers. They replay what they said, how they sounded, what might have been revealed. And instead of feeling relief for being understood, they feel exposed, almost naked in a world where they have spent a lifetime building walls. This is why regret often follows their rare glimpses of honesty. They might share a piece of their past, admit to a fear, or let someone see a softer edge, and almost instantly, the doubts flood in. Why did I say that? Did I give away too much? Will they think less of me now? In their mind, vulnerability becomes evidence of weakness, a flaw that others can exploit. What was meant to create intimacy turns into fuel for self-criticism. They convince themselves that they've revealed something that cannot be taken back, and in doing so, they've lost control of how they are seen. But the truth is very different. Vulnerability, in the eyes of another, rarely looks like weakness. It looks like trust. It looks like courage. It looks like an invitation to be closer. The irony is that the very thing they believe ruined the moment is usually what deepens it. The words they regret, the softness they try to cover, the glimpse of their true self that they wish they could undo, those are the very things that make the connection more real, not less. Still, their fear doesn't let them see it that way. They have been trained through experience or through pain to believe that showing too much will only lead to rejection. And so, when they take that rare risk and open up, the instinct to retreat becomes even stronger. They shut down, they pull away, they act as if nothing was said. Not because it meant nothing to them, but because it meant everything, and that is terrifying. This cycle repeats itself quietly. The push and pull of wanting closeness, yet fearing exposure creates confusion, both for them and for those who care about them. And while the other person might be touched by their honesty, they are haunted by it. In their world, closeness feels like a gamble, one where the stakes are unbearably high. Yet the deeper truth is this: every time they regret being vulnerable, it's because it mattered. They wouldn't feel exposed if they didn't care about the bond. They wouldn't replay the moment if it didn't hold weight. Vulnerability only feels like weakness to the one who fears it. To everyone else, it looks like strength. And what they think ruined it often turns out to be the very thing that keeps the connection alive. When they take a step back, it's easy to misinterpret the silence as indifference. To the outside, it can look cold, even dismissive, as though they simply don't care. But inside, the reality is much more complicated. Pulling back is not a sign of emptiness. It's a shield, a defense against the fear that intimacy will hurt them more than distance ever could. They retreat not because they feel nothing, but because they feel too much, and the intensity of it threatens to overwhelm them. The mind convinces them that closeness is dangerous. Every gesture of affection, every invitation to open up, every sign of commitment stirs a quiet panic. What if they lean in and are rejected? What if they show their heart and it's mishandled? What if the very act of needing someone becomes the reason they are abandoned? These questions loop endlessly, and so, to regain a sense of safety, they withdraw. Space becomes their refuge. Distance becomes their armor. To those who care about them, this retreat can feel like a punishment, a wall built out of indifference. But the truth is far softer than it appears. Pulling back is their way of trying to manage a storm they don't yet know how to calm. They believe that by stepping away, they can regain control over emotions that feel too unpredictable. It's not that they want to disconnect. It's that they fear the weight of connection will crush them. The contradiction is painful. They crave closeness but fear it. They long for intimacy but resist it. So they dance in between, moving forward and then back again, sending mixed signals that confuse not only others but themselves. They might appear distant, but their distance is not the absence of love, it's the echo of fear. What they cannot always see is that retreating doesn't protect them from pain, it only delays it. The very act of pulling away can create the loss they dread, yet in the moment, it feels safer to hold back than to risk being vulnerable. To them, silence feels like strength, even though it often leaves them more isolated. Still, within the pullback, there is something unspoken care. If they truly felt nothing, they wouldn't wrestle with the distance. They wouldn't feel torn between staying close and running away. The struggle itself reveals the truth. What they are avoiding is not connection, but the terror of losing it. And so, when they step back, it should not always be seen as rejection. More often, it is an unspoken admission that the closeness matters too much. It matters so much that they would rather retreat into safety than risk destroying it by being fully seen. Pulling away is not the absence of feeling, it is the presence of fear. And if the fear is that strong, then so too is the longing hidden beneath it. Deep inside, they wrestle with a contradiction that never quite lets them rest. On one side is the craving for closeness, the quiet longing to be held, to be seen, to finally feel safe in the presence of another. On the other side is the relentless fear that they are already too much or not nearly enough, so every move feels like the wrong one. If they lean in too far, they fear suffocating the connection. If they step back too much, they fear being forgotten. And somewhere between the push and the pull, they convince themselves they've ruined it all. It's not that they don't want intimacy. In fact, they often want it more than they can admit, even to themselves. But intimacy carries risk. To them, needing someone feels like surrendering control, and surrendering control feels like walking blind into rejection. The heart wants to trust, but the mind whispers that trust will only end in pain. So instead of enjoying closeness, they analyze it, dissect it, question whether their presence is welcome, whether their absence will be noticed, whether their every move is silently judged. This is where the inner battle grows exhausting. One part of them longs to pour into the bond, to relax into it, to finally stop second-guessing. Another part whispers that giving too much will expose them, that they'll be seen as needy, clingy, unworthy. So they try to play it safe, pulling back just enough to keep their heart hidden, yet close enough to not let go completely. It becomes a balancing act, but one that never feels steady. And in this constant tug of war, they create stories that aren't true. They imagine that one wrong word or one missed message has destroyed everything. They imagine that their distance has been interpreted as rejection, that their presence has been seen as overbearing. They believe they are too hot or too cold, too far or too near, never finding the perfect middle ground. And each imagined mistake reinforces the belief, I must have messed it up. But what they cannot see in those moments is that intimacy is not about perfection. It isn't measured by flawless timing or ideal levels of closeness. It's measured by presence, by the willingness to return after drifting, by the courage to stay even when fear says to run. The connection does not collapse because of one misstep. It grows through the honesty of trying again. The truth they rarely allow themselves to feel is that they are not too much and they are not too little. They are human, and humanity is messy. The ones who care about them don't count the steps forward or backward. They notice the effort, the intention, the quiet proof that even in fear, they still want to belong. What they believe ruined the bond is often nothing more than a shadow cast by doubt. Beneath it, the desire for closeness is still there, unbroken, waiting to be trusted. There is a tendency to believe that a single moment defines everything. One awkward silence, one delayed reply, one poorly chosen word, and suddenly, in their mind, the entire connection has collapsed. They carry the weight of each slip as though it were permanent, as though intimacy could be shattered in an instant. What they miss is the deeper truth. Bonds are not so fragile. Connection does not vanish because of hesitation or distance. It lives and breathes in patterns, in consistency, in the steady rhythm of showing up again and again. The avoidant mind struggles to hold on to this truth because fear magnifies every small detail. Where most would see a pause as normal, they see it as failure. Where most would forgive an off day, they see a sign of rejection. They believe they are walking a tightrope where one wrong step will send everything crashing down. And in that belief, they forget the resilience of love. Real intimacy isn't destroyed by a single mistake. It's tested over time, it bends under pressure, but it doesn't break because of a stumble. Just as trust isn't built in a day, it isn't lost in a moment. It's built through patterns, through the way someone continues to return after distance, the way they continue to try after silence, the way they choose to be present even when fear says to run. Consistency is what sustains connection, not flawless performance. The tragedy is that when they believe they've ruined it with one misstep, they often stop showing up altogether. They retreat, convinced the damage is beyond repair, not realizing that leaving is what creates the real fracture. They think the moment of hesitation is unforgivable, when in truth, what matters most is what comes after, the choice to come back, to reach out, to repair. A single silence doesn't break a bond. Prolonged silence does. A single retreat doesn't kill connection. Staying gone does. The truth is far gentler than their fear allows them to believe. No one expects perfection in intimacy. What matters is presence. What matters is the return. What matters is the willingness to stay, not without flaws, but with consistency. The people who care about them aren't measuring their worth by a single mistake. They are noticing the patterns, the devotion, the effort. What feels to them like a fatal flaw is usually just a human moment. And if they could step outside their fear for just a second, they would see that the bond is not nearly as fragile as they imagine. It does not collapse under hesitation. It grows when two people are willing to keep choosing each other, even after the stumbles. So the truth is, simple connection is not lost in the stumble. It is lost only when one decides not to return. And more often than not, the bond is waiting, stronger than the doubt that clouds their mind. What they fear most is the very thing their doubt quietly creates. Deep down, abandonment sits like a shadow, always lurking, always whispering that one wrong move will push the bond beyond repair. They walk into connection already braced for loss, expecting the moment they will be left behind. And because that fear is so loud, they begin to act in ways that make the prophecy real. They retreat when closeness grows. They silence themselves when words are needed. They convince themselves the bond is broken before it truly has the chance to breathe. This is the cruel irony of fear. It doesn't just predict pain, it shapes it. Believing they are unworthy of lasting intimacy, they pull back to protect themselves. But the very act of pulling back plants doubt in the heart of the other. Believing they have already ruined everything, they stop showing up. And slowly, the distance they created for safety becomes the evidence they feared all along. To them, it looks like proof. I knew I would be abandoned. But often, what they see as abandonment is actually the result of their own retreat. The truth is, connection is rarely destroyed by one wrong word or one awkward silence. What weakens it is the slow erosion that happens when fear takes control. When someone chooses silence over honesty, retreat over return, doubt over trust, the bond starts to fray. Not because they were unworthy, not because they were too much or not enough, but because the fear convinced them they had already lost. And so they stopped fighting for what was still theirs. What they don't always see is that the very presence of fear means the bond matters. If they truly didn't care, they wouldn't be afraid of losing it. The depth of their anxiety reveals the depth of their desire. And yet, instead of trusting that desire, they let fear twist it into doubt. They see their longing as weakness instead of proof of love. They see their need as a flaw instead of the most human truth, that everyone, even the most guarded, craves closeness. The tragedy is not that they are unworthy of love, but that they don't believe love can withstand their imperfection. They think one misstep equals rejection, so they retreat. They think needing someone equals weakness, so they hide. And in hiding, they create the very loss they dreaded. But abandonment was never the truth. It was only the story fear told them until they began to live it out. The reality is far kender. Connection survives the stumbles. Love does not demand perfection, only presence. The fear that they are too much or not enough is only an illusion. What truly creates distance is not who they are, but the belief that they are already doomed to be left behind. And if they could see beyond that belief, they would realize the thing they fear most is not inevitable. It is only a shadow, one that disappears the moment they choose to stay instead of run. In the end, the truth is far simpler than the stories fear invents. They never truly ruin it with hesitation, with silence, with a stumble in closeness. What matters is not the retreat, but the return. What matters is not the moment of doubt, but the choice to step through it. Intimacy is not so fragile that one mistake will shatter it. It is strengthened by honesty, by presence, by the courage to keep showing up even when fear screams otherwise. The avoidant heart is not broken, it is guarded. And behind those walls is not indifference, but longing. Longing to be safe, longing to be seen, longing to finally trust that love can endure the cracks, the pauses, the imperfections. They may believe they have ruined it, but more often than not, the bond is still there, waiting, patient, resilient. The greatest tragedy would not be the stumble, but the decision to stop walking altogether. Because the truth is, love doesn't vanish in the shadows of fear. It waits in the light of return, in the quiet courage of trying again, in the gentle reminder that what feels like the end is often just another chance to begin.